Okay, so I've got just a little bit more Buddhism to do. I hit the wrong button and I apologize. So let's just get this part done. So, as Buddha taught, and as his monks became enlightened fellows in themselves, he would send them out in groups of four to traverse the land and to teach others. So, essentially, what he would do is he would say, go to another village, set up shop, and live your life. And as people see that you are happy, they will come and inquire of you. And when they're ready, teach them. So it's kind of a warm sale religion, which is pretty cool. Well, this worked. And even after Buddha attained his enlightenment, he passed on, he left a great nirvanic void, Buddhism continued to spread. So it's known as a transnational religion. It crossed borders. It was so good at this that by the 2nd century CE, the monks had to come together because they needed to start canonizing. And canonizing means putting things down on paper and saying this is it. Well, they started writing down the 80,000 teachings that Siddhartha was supposed to have left behind, which had been passed on by word of mouth for about 600 years. Apparently Buddha likes that. And essentially, they came up with a couple of books. So you get the Pali Canon text, but first of all, you get the Tripitaka, one of the earliest versions of the Buddhist teachings. Well, now that things are canonized, how do we interpret them? This is where schools of thought began to develop. The first one to really form was known as Theravada or Hinayana. Theravada means the path of elders, or if you will, the orthodox, and Hinayana means the lesser vehicle, because what it focused on was enlightenment of the self, or the early teachings of the Buddha. So this type of Buddhism basically says, enlighten yourself and become an example to others. All right? You find it in places like Mongolia and Burma, Thailand, that type of culture. The monks are venerated, and the monks control the interpretation of Buddhism, of that Buddhism for the people. The second school that formed almost immediately after was known as Mahayana, or the greater vehicle, because they focused on compassion. The later teachings of the Buddha, the Heart Sutra. How can I truly enjoy my enlightenment if others are suffering? So they focused on a being called a bodhisattva, or a living Buddha, somebody who actually comes back to this world in order to help others. That gets to be complicated, and it's a difficult task. And so in this system, the monks decide to work with the lay people, because the idea is that you're going to live multiple lives. You'll be a lay person or a non-clergy, and you come back as a regular Joe, and then you come back and you're a little more spiritual, and the next time you're more spiritual, and then the next lifetime you become a monk. And then you don't quite get it, so you become a monk again, and a monk again, and a monk again, and then bam, you are a bodhisattva. So it takes multiple lifetimes. And in fact, Mahayana Buddhism, as it allowed for cultural adaptation, the philosophy was essentially, people want to be happy. Let's go in and see what their system is and combine it with ours. Nothing wrong with that. So you end up with things like Zen Buddhism that formed from this. So the idea is that Buddhism left India, went into China, and merged with Taoism to create a form of Buddhism called Chan. Chan basically says empty the mind, right? That's how you find enlightenment. You stop thinking about specific things, empty the mind, and you can become a vessel for the omnipotence of the Buddha force. Well, that religion gets exported into Japan at one point, where it studies and merges with Shinto, and you get Zen, which focuses on the austerity of the moment, because Japan, remembers, a very much a warrior country, and they never knew when they were going to die. So you never know when you're going to be called to war, when death will claim you. Every moment is important, and there's a level of austerity that comes with that. Focus on beauty, focus on ceremony, and focus on emptying the mind. Short-circuit the mind. What is the sound of one hand clapping? What happens if a tree falls in a forest and no one's there to hear it? Why do we drive on a parkway and park on a driveway, right? Blow your mind and see the true truth. Well, Buddhism continued to spread, and one of the last countries that it went to was actually Tibet. And in Tibet, there was a religion called Bön. And Bön was a sex death cult, right? So it focused on life and death. Well, when the Buddhist monks came, they set up shop, they lived happily, and of course, remember, Tibet's an isolated community because they're up in the Himalayan mountains. But the women were fascinated because in this system, they had a little more equality. So the men, of course, followed the women, and Buddhism begins to merge with Boon. And so you end up with some really radical images, and even almost tantric images. The monk is male, wisdom is female, and you combine these two, and so you end up with this kind of shocking form of sexualized Buddhism, which is symbolic. It's symbolic, but okay. One of the best examples of Tibetan Buddhism comes from the Dalai Lama. So in Tibet, they studied Mahayana Buddhism that said, you live, you die, you live, you die, you live, you die. You become a monk, and then you live and die and live and die and live and die, and then you become a bodhisattva. And they were like, no. I want to become a bodhisattva now. And so they came up with something called Vajrayana, which means diamond or lightning vessel. So instead of living lifetime to lifetime to lifetime to lifetime to lifetime, they're going to become living Buddhas or living bodhisattvas in one lifetime. So the Dalai Lama is born, and because he is compassionate, he chooses to come back and incarnate again and again in order to lead his people. So he is a primary example of a living Buddha, but he is not the Buddhist Pope. So please do not make that mistake. He is the king of Tibet and the leader of a branch within Vajrayana Buddhism, but he is no more than that. So what I have with me, a couple of different samples of Buddhas, which I alluded to earlier. So let's just look at these three. This one is Korean, and you can usually tell because they're slightly wider, broader. And of course, this one's hand-carved. China, right, with the Buddha that you rub. This one is Tibet. They're usually quite colorful. This one is the Buddha of healing. I actually did have this blessed, if you will. And notice that this Buddha has his foot out. This one is meditating, and this one has his foot out. That's kind of an act that they're ready to get up, jump up, and help you. Tibet also came up with these wonderful brass bowls. Now, I can't really play it well holding a computer, but I can at least give you a sound or two. Used for meditation, right? And then the last thing that I will focus on is, I can get this to do it. There we go. Sorry, not to make you seasick. That image at the top is a mandala. So there are a group of monks that come and travel throughout the Western world. They are living in India currently because, of course, Tibet was conquered by China in 1950, but they continue the Tibetan tradition. And they create these beautiful sand mandalas. And the sand mandala is actually designed to be something like a physical manifestation of meditation. You look at the outer ring and you focus on that, and then you look on the ring next to it or inside of it, and you keep going until you get to the very center of the mandala. And just as you look from outside to inside of the mandala, you go from outside the external mind to the internal mind within. And of course, the monks spend a week doing this. They build it grain by grain. It does definitely take a week, and they usually have a team of 4 working on this at any one time. They let it sit for a short amount of time, and then they sweep it up, and they pour the sand into the ocean. Because everything in life is impermanent. And so that is the symbolism here. So I hope that helps, and hopefully next time I'll be able to get everything in one take in one video.